That night, the city seemed to follow its usual rhythm, until the distant roar of engines broke the silence. The small street food vendor, accustomed to facing hardships, sensed that something was wrong. 5 bikers emerged from the darkness, bringing with them an air of menace. They weren't there to eat. They wanted to instill fear, humiliate, destroy. People around turned their faces away, pretending not to see anything. No one dared to intervene. But among the passers-by, there was someone different. A man who wasn't just watching, he was analyzing, observing, waiting for the right moment. And when he finally stood up, the fate of that street changed forever. Want to know how this story ends? Then watch until the end. And of course, click the like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more amazing stories like this one. Now, let's get to the story. The city had a pulse of its own, a constant rhythm that never ceased. Even as the night approached, covering the tall buildings with a dark mantle dotted with artificial lights, the streets were still alive. Exhausted workers made their way home with heavy steps, longing only for the comfort of a hot meal and well-deserved rest. Couples strolled slowly, fingers intertwined, exchanging discreet smiles as if each moment was too precious to be wasted. Tourists explored every alley and corner, their cameras flashing as they captured moments that, for them, were part of a unique adventure. But for the locals, it was just another ordinary day. Among those anonymous faces, one boy stood out. Not because of his appearance, not because of any striking presence, but because of the persistent glow in his tired eyes. The determination stamped on his expression made him different. Behind a small food cart, he worked tirelessly. His small hands, slightly dirty with flour and grease, shaped hamburgers with skill. His nimble fingers flipped the meat on the hot griddle, where the soft sizzle of fat mixed with the unmistakable aroma of grilled meat and toasted bread. The scent lingered in the air, inviting, stirring the appetite of passers-by who happened to walk by. Between orders, the boy wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand and quickly checked the money in the small cash box beside him. He did this constantly, as if he needed to make sure that every coin was still there, as if at any moment it could all simply disappear. And for him, it really could. Each bill represented something greater than just its printed value. It meant another day with food on the table, another bill paid, another dose of medicine for his mother. Life had never been kind to him. His father had left years ago, taking with him not just his presence but the security and stability of their home. His mother, once a strong and active woman, now spent her days confined to bed, a victim of an illness that drained her strength with each passing week. His younger sister, still too small to understand the weight of the responsibility resting on her brother's shoulders, slept every night unaware that he was the one carrying everything alone. He knew that his age didn't matter. The world wouldn't wait for him to grow up before testing his strength. There was no room for weakness. Hard work was his only option, and failure was not something he could afford. The street where he worked was, for the most part, peaceful. The customers were kind, or at least indifferent. Those who didn't buy anything simply passed by, not interfering with his small business. Some people smiled when they saw the young boy working so hard, admiring his determination. Others just walked on, unconcerned. But that night, fate decided to act differently. The first warning came as a distant roar, a deep, pulsing sound that rumbled through the asphalt like thunder echoing on the horizon. The boy lifted his eyes for a moment, slightly furrowing his brow as he realized the noise wasn't fading. On the contrary, it was getting closer. The sound of engines grew louder, closer, more threatening. Before he could fully grasp the situation, the air was cut by 5 motorcycles that appeared at the corner and stopped abruptly in front of the food cart. The sudden impact shattered the street's routine, drawing the attention of some passers-by who, upon recognizing the newcomers, quickly looked away and hurried their steps. The leader of the group was the first to step down. His presence was imposing, broad shoulders and a robust body wrapped in a black leather jacket adorned with worn-out emblems. His sharp eyes scanned the environment with disdain, as if everything around him was irrelevant. Behind him, the other 4 gang members spread out in an instinctive formation, assuming a posture that exuded arrogance and dominance. The boy swallowed hard but kept his hands busy with the hamburger he was finishing. He had already learned that in certain situations, the best thing to do was not to react. Pretend nothing was happening. Keep working and hope their presence would be fleeting. But this was not a lucky night. The leader walked toward the cart, his heavy footsteps echoing on the asphalt. His gaze met the boy's, and for a moment, a crooked smile formed on his lips. There was something cruel in it, something that indicated he already had a plan in mind. Slowly, his hand reached for the hot griddle, where a freshly made hamburger rested on a bun. He took the food without permission, without asking, without even considering paying for it. He lifted it into the air, inspecting it with disdain, as if evaluating its quality. The other bikers laughed. Then came the bite. A large chunk chewed exaggeratedly as if he wanted to show that the hamburger meant absolutely nothing to him. The boy kept his eyes fixed on the cart, trying not to show his frustration. He already knew how this would end, and it ended exactly as he expected. The leader, after chewing a bit more, made an exaggerated grimace as if the food was disgusting. Then deliberately he spat a piece onto the ground and tossed the rest of the hamburger aside, letting it fall near the boy's feet. The laughter returned. The second gang member, encouraged by the leader's actions, decided to join in on the humiliation. With a sudden kick, he knocked over one of the cart's trays, sending cups tumbling and scattering ingredients onto the ground. The sound of metal clashing against the asphalt made some people around flinch, but no one intervened. Z, the third biker, followed suit. He grabbed a bottle of condiments and squeezed it onto the hot griddle, spreading the red liquid across the heated surface until it sizzled and began to burn. The boy felt his stomach tighten. The smell of burning condiments mixed with hot oil felt like an insult to his efforts. He kept his fist clenched but didn't react. He knew that if he did anything, he would only make things worse. The other bikers crossed their arms, enjoying the spectacle. It was entertainment for them, nothing more than a sadistic pastime. The boy wanted to believe that someone would step in, that one of the passers-by would call the police or at least try to help. But reality was cruel. Some people watched from afar but quickly looked away when the bikers' eyes met theirs. Others simply pretended not to see, continuing their way as if nothing was happening. It was always like this. No one wanted to stand up to a gang. But that night someone was already watching, and that someone was not like the others. The night had become a stage for humiliation, and the bikers were the protagonists of a cruel spectacle. The boy, still gripping the counter of the food cart, tried to stay firm, but his body trembled. It wasn't just fear. It was anger. It was helplessness. It was the weight of knowing that no one there would do anything for him. The street, once busy and noisy, now felt strangely silent. There were people everywhere, but no one dared to intervene. Their eyes quickly looked away whenever one of the bikers noticed them, as if ignoring the situation would be enough to make them disappear. But in that moment, something changed. Sitting on a stone bench a few meters away, a man watched everything with a dangerous calm. His body, a true wall of sculpted muscle, remained still, as if he were waiting for something. He held a disposable cup, resting beside him, untouched. His eyes, however, were different. They carried a weight that few there could understand. Dwayne Johnson was not a spectator. He never had been. He had seen this kind of scene before, in different places with different faces, but always the same pattern. Arrogant men who enjoyed feeling powerful at the expense of the weak. Cruel laughter echoing over someone else's suffering. Innocent people crushed by those who had never faced a real opponent. For a moment, he simply took a deep breath, observing. His instincts told him that this situation could only end one way. He didn't like pointless violence. He was never a man who sought fights without reason, but he also never turned a blind eye when he saw someone defenseless being attacked. And then he moved. The cup was placed aside without hurry. Dwayne's massive body rose with a surprising fluidity for someone of his size. Every muscle contracted and relaxed with mechanical precision, as if his body knew exactly what it needed to do. He didn't need to run. He didn't need to raise his voice. He just walked. His steps were firm, and even without trying to draw attention, he did. The crowd felt his approach before even fully seeing him. It was as if the very atmosphere around him had changed. Some people, without knowing why, stepped back a few inches. The bikers were still focused on their cruel game when he finally stopped beside the cart. The boy, surprised, looked up and saw a face that seemed carved from stone. There was no anger there, no impatience, just an overwhelming calm, like the silence before a storm. The bikers noticed his presence shortly after. First, one of them, frowning, trying to understand what this man was doing there, just standing. Then the other three, exchanging quick glances but keeping their expressions relaxed. The gang leader took a little longer. When he finally turned to face Dwayne, his first instinct was to mock. He flashed a crooked, provocative smile, as if he had just found a new toy to play with. But then he looked into Dwayne's eyes. And in that exact moment, something inside him hesitated. There was something different there, something that didn't make sense. Dwayne said nothing. He didn't move. He just stood there staring at the gang leader as if he could see beyond the tough guy facade he wore. The silence became uncomfortable. The leader of the gang tried to mask his own uncertainty. He puffed out his chest, squared his shoulders, and stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His game had always worked, always. Intimidation was his favorite weapon. If he occupied enough space, if he challenged the other with his presence, most people would back down. But Dwayne Johnson was not most people. The massive man in front of him didn't flinch, didn't blink. His gaze remained firm, heavy as a boulder. The gang leader felt his jaw clench, but he didn't back down. He couldn't back down. His men were watching. The people around them were watching. So, he did what he always did. He raised his hand, trying to shove Dwayne back to assert his dominance. It was a mistake. Before his palm could even touch Dwayne's chest, something happened. Dwayne moved with the speed and precision of an experienced hunter. His large, calloused hand shot forward and grabbed the gang leader's wrist before he could even process what was happening. The grip was immediate. It was like an iron vise had locked around his arm. The leader instinctively tried to pull his hand back, but he couldn't. His muscles, trained for physical confrontations, felt useless against the crushing strength of that grip. The other gang members took a step back, startled. They had never seen anyone react that way. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. The gang leader tried to hide the pain spreading through his wrist, but it was impossible. He could feel his bones being compressed, his circulation being cut off, and for the first time in a long time, he realized he had made a mistake he couldn't undo. Dwayne didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just kept his gaze locked, squeezing the aggressor's wrist with just enough force to make him understand what would happen if he tried anything else. The gang leader gritted his teeth, his face turning redder by the second. He knew that if he fought back, he would lose. And losing, for him, was not an option. But before he could make any decision, Dwayne Johnson released him. With a firm motion, the leader stumbled back, rubbing his sore wrist, casting an angry glare. But now there was something new in his eyes. It wasn't just rage. It was fear. And this was only the beginning. The moment Dwayne grabbed the gang leader's arm, everything changed. The biker had no time to react. The impact of the grip was immediate, crushing. His eyes widened, his mouth opened in an involuntary reflex of surprise and pain. His muscles, once so imposing, were now completely overpowered by the absurd strength holding him. Dwayne didn't hesitate. With a strong pull, he brought the leader forward as if he were moving a rag doll. The biker's solid body lifted off the ground for a moment before crashing hard against the side of the food cart. The metal vibrated from the impact, producing a sharp sound that echoed through the street. Trays fell, ingredients scattered across the pavement, and the cart itself shook, nearly toppling over. The leader let out a muffled groan as pain exploded in his back. His chest was pressed against the metal, making it hard to breathe, and his mind spun in confusion. This had never happened before. He was used to being the predator, not the prey. For a moment, the scene froze in time. The other four bikers stood still, shocked at the sight of their leader being manhandled so effortlessly. The disbelief was clear on their faces. But then, As if an instinctive force took over, they reacted. The most impulsive of the group was the first to move. He lunged forward with a furious roar, his heavy footsteps pounding the asphalt as his fist swung for a punch. Dwayne saw the strike coming before the biker could even complete it. His body moved with precision, sidestepping at the exact moment. The air from the missed punch brushed past his face, but Dwayne was already in position to counter. Before the attacker could react, a powerful hand gripped his shoulder firmly. The touch was like a steel trap closing around his clavicle. And then, with seemingly no effort at all, Dwayne shoved him back with a sharp push to the chest. The impact was devastating. The biker was thrown backward, his feet leaving the ground for a brief instant before he crashed hard onto the pavement. His body skidded a few inches before stopping, and a groan of pain escaped his lips as he struggled to catch his breath. Another gang member wasted no time. Seeing his companion taken down so easily, he instinctively reached into his jacket and pulled out a silver switchblade. The blade gleamed under the streetlights as he gripped it tightly, moving forward in a quick, decisive motion. But Dwayne was already prepared. The moment the biker raised the weapon, a strong arm shot toward him. Dwayne's hand clamped around his wrist with surgical precision. The biker felt a shock course through his arm as he realized he could no longer move. And then, the pain came. Dwayne twisted the man's wrist downward, applying just the right amount of pressure to the joint. The biker let out a muffled cry, his fingers opening involuntarily. The blade fell, clinking onto the asphalt before sliding away, but Dwayne didn't stop there. With a firm push, he sent the man flying backward. The biker stumbled awkwardly before crashing into a nearby empty table. The wooden structure couldn't withstand the impact and shattered under his weight, leaving him groaning among the broken pieces. The fourth biker, who had been watching the scene in shock, hesitated. His gaze darted between his fallen companions and Dwayne, who now turned toward him. This wasn't a fight. It was a massacre. His instincts screamed at him to run, but he couldn't. If he ran now, he would never be respected in the gang again. His fear and his pride waged an internal battle, and he didn't know what to do. But Dwayne decided for him. With an agile motion, the massive man stepped forward. Each step seemed to make the ground tremble. Before the biker could react, a precise strike landed on his stomach. The air was knocked from his lungs in a single painful gasp. His body doubled over involuntarily, his knees giving out from the impact. He collapsed to the ground, struggling to breathe, but all he found was a crushing emptiness. The gang leader, who had been trying to recover after being thrown against the cart, took in the destruction around him. Every one of his men was down, defeated without even putting up a real fight. The pain in his back still throbbed, but it was nothing compared to the shock consuming him. This wasn't possible. He looked at Dwayne, and this time his eyes didn't hold just anger. There was something deeper there, something he didn't want to admit. Fear. Dwayne began to approach. His steps were slow, controlled, but each one carried an overwhelming weight. The leader stumbled backward, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to hide his nervousness, but he knew he had no chance. Dwayne didn't need to say anything. He simply stood there, staring at the gang leader. The silence between them was deafening. And then, the gang leader knew. He had lost. One of the bikers, still lying on the ground, began crawling away. Another tried to get up, clutching his aching ribs. The gang leader remained motionless for a few more seconds, trying to regain his composure. His pride told him to fight back. His mind told him to run. In the end, he gave in to survival instinct. With a subtle nod to his companions, he began retreating. One by one, the bikers stumbled toward their motorcycles. Their hands shook as they turned their keys in the ignition, engines roaring once again. But this time, not as symbols of power, but as a desperate escape. Within seconds, they were gone. The street, which had been thick with tension, seemed to finally exhale. Dwayne remained there unmoving, watching as the motorcycles disappeared into the darkness. His breathing was steady, controlled. His posture hadn't changed. The boy, who had witnessed everything in silence, still gripped the cart's counter. His heart pounded in his chest. The look he gave Dwayne wasn't just gratitude. It was admiration. Dwayne met his gaze for a moment, then turned away. Without hurry, he started walking back to where he had been before, as if nothing had happened. To him, this wasn't some extraordinary feat. It wasn't heroism. It was simply what needed to be done. And that night, a boy who had already lost hope learned that in a cruel world, there were still those who chose to do what was right. The engines roared once more, but not with arrogance. Now they sounded like a desperate escape. Those who had arrived with smug smiles left without looking back, carrying only the humiliation of defeat. The silence that remained was heavy. In the middle of the street, a boy looked at the man who, without saying a word, had changed his life forever. His gaze wasn't just one of gratitude, it was admiration. That night he learned that the world can be cruel, that there won't always be someone to help. But sometimes there are those who choose to do what's right. If you enjoyed this story, click the like button, leave a comment below with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell to receive more amazing stories like this one. See you in the next video.